now that I've, put them together, I've tried them out, I think the laminated one is my favorite. Hi everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Tara, and today we're going to be making a Discbound Sketchbook. I've been wanting to pick up sketching as a daily hobby for a while now, and even though it's June, I figured a custom sketchbook is a great way to get started. Just some background, I do make disc-bound planner covers for my Etsy shop, but they're typically fabric bound, and we're switching things up this time. I have this handmade paper that I found at the craft store. It's an ivory color with leaves embedded in it, and even though at the time I didn't know what I would use it for, I figured it'd be a great addition to some craft I have in the future, like this sketchbook. So today we're going to be going over some ways to preserve the paper as a cover, such as laminating and maybe using a matte varnish, as well as putting together the planner as a whole. So let's get started. Okay everyone, starting with the first step, we're going to be prepping our handmade paper to be applied to the chipboard sheets to create the book covers themselves. The chipboard sheets measure 9 inches by 5.5 inches, and I'm just using it here to roughly get the correct measurement. I aim to have about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch around each edge, just to make it easier when we're gluing everything together later on. Altogether, we're going to be cutting out 4 sheets, 2 sheets for the laminated version and 2 sheets for the unlaminated version. For the next step, we're going to be prepping the cover for the laminated set. Taking 2 of those sheets that we just cut down to size, we're going to place them wrong sides together into a laminating pocket. The handmade paper is essentially dual-sided, so take whichever side you want to be visible and place those towards the outside of the pocket, and then send it through your laminator. You can use whatever thickness laminating pockets or sheets that you have, but I personally prefer 5mm, which is what we're going to be using here. And once the sheets are laminated, you're just going to trim the edge. You can use scissors, but I'm using a metal ruler and my X-Acto knife. And just trim along the edge as close as possible to the paper within the pocket that you can get. That extra margin that I cut into them also helps here in case you do have to trim into the actual width or height of the paper itself. Now moving to the chipboard sheets, this is just a personal preference of mine. I like to round the corners when I make covers, just because it gives it a nicer, smoother feel as you're using it day to day. Well, it looks like we have our first technical error, which is bound to happen. The next step was not recorded by my camera, so I'll just talk us through the process really quickly. Essentially, taking those handmade paper sheets that we created, we're going to go ahead and glue those using the Line Co. bookbinding glue that I buy off of Amazon. And we're going to glue the sheets onto the chipboard, making sure to smooth out any bubbles and clean up any excess glue around the edges. And then I place them in my homemade book press for about an hour just to fully dry. If you don't have a book press, you can always use a bunch of heavy books or weights, something that just applies pressure as it dries. And now moving on to the next step of this project. This here is the sketchbook that we're going to be using for the inside of our Discbound Sketchbook project today. Unfortunately, as you can see, I only got about 2 pages in before I stopped using it. So instead of letting the paper go to waste, we're just going to repurpose it here. This metal ruler was not going to do the job if we wanted it to be square. So luckily I have this T-square, which we're able to butt up against the straight edge of the paper inside the sketchbook, which will allow us to cut off the inside at a straight angle. So I had put too much faith apparently into my X-Acto knife and my retractable craft blade because they were not able to cleanly cut the sketchbook pages out. So we're just gonna go ahead and pull out my X-Acto guillotine cutter and align that up for the paper so that we can trim off all the frayed edges from cutting with the X-Acto knife. And here I'm just trimming off about an extra 1/8 of an inch. It's not gonna make too much of a difference. It's still gonna fit well within the cover that we created. As you can see here, the edge came out perfectly straight and clean, which allows us to move straight into the next step, which will be punching holes. I use a Staples Arc Discbound punch, which is kind of the best I found on the market thus far to punch holes in my planners. We're also going to be using these cream colored discs to bind the entire sketchbook. I like these because they have a hole and a slit on the side, which allows for storage of your drawing pencil so that I can keep it with me or with my sketchbook specifically. It takes a good amount of time to punch an entire stack of paper, but once you're in the groove, it moves by pretty quickly. So once all the pages are punched, we can now add them onto our discs. If you've never used a disc-bound planner or notebook, you have to add the pages on a handful at a time, about 15 or so at a time, just because it's really difficult to bend the paper to get them onto the discs with the mushroom shape if you try to add an entire stack at once. And with that, we're now done with the interiors and we can move forward with our covers. This here is the homemade book press that I mentioned earlier in the video. It's made from bamboo wood sheets and a C-clamp that I got from the hardware store. I place my book covers as well as the entire planners as a whole as I make them into the press with sheets of white copy paper to absorb any excess moisture from the glue. The pressure helps them dry evenly and keep the board straight. Now that everything's dry, we can move forward with trimming the edges. This is also why I tend to leave a bigger margin than maybe I might need in the beginning, because we're going to trim them anyways. As we trim, we want to try to leave about a 1/4 inch on each side, but bring it in closer for the curves, maybe closer to a 1/4 inch. The curves are actually cut closer than the 1/2 inch recommendation, just because it makes it easier when we go to glue them down as well. Grabbing my little box of clips here, we're going to go ahead and start gluing down the edges. Typically with the corners, at least with my fabric bound planners, I like to trim the corners at a 45-degree angle to help with bulk and to help the corners lay down at a right angle better. But with this paper, we're going to glue them down since it is thinner. At this point in the project, I started to lose faith in the unlaminated cover. As beautiful as it was, and it maintained the texture of the leaves in the paper that I wanted, it was just too thin of a paper. As we saw earlier on, there was a thinner spot from pressing it when we glued the sheets onto the chipboard. And now, as I'm gluing the corners, the glue is just seeping through, which is why I'm constantly having to wipe my fingers off. Now that we're done gluing down all the straight edges, we can now work on the corners. Once we apply the glue within the corner itself, we want to kind of use a pinning and tucking motion, pulling small pieces of the corner so that it lies as tightly and closely as possible, making sure to go back over it and kind of smooth everything out as you go to get the right kind of shape. All right, pulling our book covers back out of the book press, it looks like everything is drying just as we wanted. They're nice and flat, which is a huge benefit of using these book boards, and they're perfectly dry, which is what I'm feeling for now. And with that, we can move on to our next step, which is going to be adding in our plastic discbound spines. I ordered these from my Etsy shop, so I already had some on hand and ready to go. And I like to use the Beacon Quick Grip Contact Cement, which is a low toxin, quick drying contact cement that helps keep these spines in place. Applying this glue to the spine, I try to add about a pencil lead thickness of glue along the bottom edge, just to control any seepage so that no glue gets on the front of the cover or too much along the back. And then once that's applied, I press it as firmly as possible, add in my pink clips to add some pressure and hold everything in place. And then I use a plastic scrap that I keep around to just clean up any excess glue that it's already squeezed out along the edge. Once the front cover is fully dry, I use it as a marker or a measure for the second cover, lining it up perfectly before I apply the second spine so that each discbound hole is perfectly aligned. Once the glue is applied, it takes about 30 to 45 minutes to dry, so we'll just set that to the side. Then of course, we're going to repeat it with our other cover. Once the glue on the spines are fully dry, we can take the clips off and go ahead and prep our end papers, which are going to be the colored papers that go on the inside, covering the chipboard side of the sheet. Just trimming them down to size. Again, the chipboard sheet is 9 inches by 5.5 inches. And when I cut the interior end sheets, I take off about 1/4 inch on each side. And just like our chipboard cover sheets, we're going to go ahead and round the corners of our end pages so that it matches and aligns perfectly. And here, just because that corner punch doesn't always cut cleanly, I'm just trimming the edges to make it a little smoother. Now, gathering supplies to add the end pages onto our chipboard sheets, I'm going to pull back out that book press because once they're glued, we're going to press them again to make sure that the glue we use doesn't cause the board to warp. We're going to get my little bowl of bookbinding glue, my paintbrush, and we're going to try to apply an even, not too thick, not too thin, which I know is very vague, application of glue around the back of the chipboard sheet. Once it is evenly applied, making sure to stay about 1/4 inch from the edges, we're going to peel that white strip on the plastic spine, which is double-sided tape. Align our end sheet up perfectly with the edge, and then use the bone folder and scraper to push the paper onto the glue, making sure to align it. I like to use the bone folder to press out any excess glue along the edges and clean it up before I put the book covers into the book press. Once everything is lying flat and pressed, we're going to go ahead and put a white sheet of copy paper against the chipboard sheet and line it up on our book press while we go ahead and add glue to the rest of the covers. Pro tip when doing bookbinding, always try to keep a paper towel or a napkin of some kind next to you, because the amount of glue that you use doing these kind of projects that will get on your hands or on the undersides of your project that you're working on, it's going to be a lot easier to have it at the ready than having to stop what you're doing and go and find one. Once all the covers are prepped with their end sheets and ready to go on the book press, we're going to press it for about an hour just to give that glue as much time as possible to dry, and again, keep the boards as flat as possible. We're now moving into the home stretch. With everything dry, pressed, and ready to go, the final 2 steps we're going to do now are add in our elastic closures, which is what holds the book closed when you're not using it. And I do that using my hole punch, some gold eyelets, and some white elastic here. I like to apply the eyelets about 1.5 inches into the cover, just so that it fully secures all the paper on the inside when I do pull it closed. And luckily, this hole punch is also an eyelet applicator, which comes in handy for making my covers. And with that, we can now add in our elastic, which has barbed ends to hold it in place. And with that, the laminated cover is complete, but we now need to seal our unlaminated cover. So here we are. I couldn't find any spray varnish. I really thought I had some on hand, but I do remember from architecture school that we would seal papers with matte medium. So just using a foam paintbrush, I add a good 2-3 layers to the paper just to truly seal it in and make sure that while I'm using it or carrying it out and about, the paper is less likely to get damaged or rip from my purse or bag as I go. And as that's left to dry, we're fully done with this project. And now for the big reveal. All right, and there you guys have it. We've created our 2 covers, which of course one is the sketchbook and one is just my daily planner with the other planner cover on it. I will say, now that I've put them together, I've tried them out, I think the laminated one is my favorite just because it feels more durable. Rubbing the corners, pulling it in and out of my bag. I'm not worried that it's gonna damage the cover or the paper. I feel like it'll last a long time. Also, these are the discs that I added to the cover. You see how it holds my pencil perfectly because of the holes and the little slit on the side for the clip type of pencil I use. But the one with the matte varnish on it, it did maintain some of the texture, but it's kind of tacky to the feel because of the matte medium I used to seal it. And also, it has a lot of brush strokes that you can feel as well that are kind of conflicting with the leaf pattern, which is what I wanted to preserve. I wanted to preserve the leaf texture. So this one's kind of a fail. I'm not gonna use this one. But I will stick to using the laminated cover one. So thank you guys for joining me on this project, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.